Hi everyone, my name is Karen. Today I'm going to talk to you about my research project on the gopher tortoise, titled Why They Do the Things They Do and Their Impact. Just a little background information on the gopher tortoise. The gopher tortoise originated 60 million years ago. They're the oldest living species on the planet. They are the only native North American tortoise east of the Mississippi River, and at one time their range extended from southern South Carolina into Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida. Today they're found primarily in southern Georgia and Florida. So why is this species so important to study? The gopher tortoise is a keystone species, which means they impact more than 350 animals and insects through two different mechanisms, one primarily being their burrows. As you can see from this slide, there are creatures that coexist with the gopher tortoise within the burrow. There are those that are dependent on that gopher tortoise. The gopher tortoise creates that original burrow, and then they create their own little sub-burrows for homes and for raising their young. And of course, the casual visitors as well. The other way that they support those 350 species and insects is through their diet. Because they are vegetarian and their diet consists of low bush plants, flowers, and fruit, they help replenish those plants by spreading their seeds. So what do we know about the gopher tortoise? The gopher tortoise is diurnal, so they're primarily active during sunrise to sunset. They're a solitary species, except during mating season. They spend 80% or about 19 hours of their day in their burrows, and they are herbivorous scavengers and opportunistic grazers. So what's unknown? What's unknown is how are they going to forage for food as things continue to develop, as habitat dwindles, as farmland goes away, and areas where they would build their burrows and call home start to dwindle, where they have to now forage for food across a two-lane highway or across a river or a creek that didn't exist before. So that's going to be a challenge. Their reproduction rates, we know a lot about the reproduction rates, but what percentage of them actually make it to adulthood? They do reach sexual maturity about the age of 15. On average, they have one clutch per year with an average of 5 to 8 babies within that clutch. The challenge is, if you look at this burrow in the background, but in the foreground, you actually see what's called the apron, and that's where they bury their eggs for incubation. So, because they're dependent upon temperature and humidity. And so you can imagine that the risk for that is, one, as eggs, they can be attractive to many predators for food, as well as when they come out of their shells when they're most vulnerable. The other unknown is climate change impacts. Will that, as it gets warmer, as the humidity changes, as we lose more vegetation, what is that going to do for their impact, for their environment? And of course, what is going to happen to those species that are dependent upon them? So my hypothesis is built on 3 of the more important of their routines that they do on a regular basis: the food foraging, the burrow behavior, and the reproductive rates. So my hypothesis is that gopher tortoises will adapt, survive, and support their immediate ecosystems by adapting to those three areas. My methodology included sample locations of 2 nature preserves and a sanctuary, and my recording samples were actually from direct observation and pre-recorded video utilizing our standard class methodologies. So when we look at our ethogram that we were presented and used as our model, and comparing that to the gopher tortoise, first of all, under social behavior, I deleted that entire section because, again, as I stressed earlier, gopher tortoises tend to be solitary for most of their lives. Within the area of activity, the big things that I looked at were locomotion, which is the walking or running from one or more body lengths in 10 seconds, and self-maintenance, which I defined as digging or modifying their burrow. As far as stereotypic, most of those did not apply to the gopher tortoise as well, but I did utilize the whole body, where they repeatedly perform stationary behaviors such as head bobbing and side-to-side motion. Primarily, these motions are indicators of when they're in breeding season and signs to the mate that they are ready to breed, but I wanted to see if they did them outside of those parameters. And then the other one that I looked at was locomotor, walking in the same line of travel repeatedly. Studies have shown that gopher tortoises tend to be very habitual in their paths for their feeding as well as their burrow development. As far as feeding, I eliminated all of the behaviors except for vegetation, again, because of what they eat. And of course, it's low because they are low to the ground as well. On average, they could eat anything up to about 12 inches in height. And then the last of the ethograms was talking about rest. And I deleted all of the areas except for the line. And the definition that we had was resting lying down. And I looked at that as when they were basking in the sun. So in our overall budget for activity, I look at locomotion and self-maintenance. As research supported in most cases, locomotor was about 2/3 of their activity when they were active. And then they spent about 1/3 of their time actually burrowing, making burrows and adjusting their burrows. The other area that I looked at, behavior category, was the feeding, looking at whether they fed in the morning or in the afternoon. And my study showed that they primarily, about 91% of the time, were actually feeding in the morning. And then last but not least, I look at locomotion versus lying or basking in the sun. Again, these animals are exothermic, so that they need, when they come out of the burrows, which are controlled with humidity and temperature, but when they get outside of the burrow, then obviously that's not the case, and they need to be able to be warm with that sun. So they spend some of their time, about 40% of their time, basking in the sun. And again, the rest of the time, about 61% or so, out there foraging for food and wandering around. So my hypothesis testing, my observations were definitely key behaviors of the gopher tortoise as supported by the research literature. The behaviors are core to the species and to the survival. And I actually found a great article in this 2015 research article, which was basically a collection of a lot of research findings that helped me to put together some statistics as to areas that I thought I needed to look at. The challenge, of course, is capturing the activity. And so my results and what the research showed, there is a fair amount of variability. Some similarities: gopher tortoises perform those daily activities, basking or lying in the sun, foraging, and spending time in their burrows. The research supports this observation. The study and available research found describe similar trends in the foraging behaviors of the gopher tortoises. They tend to forage for food primarily in the morning. And gopher tortoises spent nearly 80% of their time in the burrow. This observation was found in nearly all the articles that I found. However, I couldn't measure that directly, but I certainly observed that trend when, our 1-minute videos basically turned out to be, in some cases, a 2 or 3 or 4 hour investigation, sometimes even longer than that, for being able to find 20 particular instances when they were actually moving in and out of their burrows. Some differences that I observed in the variability of the research were driven by 2 factors. The observation methods, obviously observing for 10 seconds, doesn't compare to this extensive field research that's out there, where they're looking at a lot of studies over time using field cameras and that type of thing. So that truly would drive some of the variability in my research. Some of my observations, or all of my observations, were on preserves or in the sanctuary, where the environment is more protected, as opposed to tortoises that are in open environments beyond the fences, where they have a lot of those obstacles to deal with on a regular basis. So in reflection, I did learn quite a bit about the development of the species, the ontogeny, but I didn't observe it during my study, obviously. Gopher tortoises, most tortoises for that matter, are born just small images of their adults. They have a softer shell and obviously more vulnerable, but the species that I observed were juveniles and adults. The evolutionary development and adaptation to the environmental changes is traced back all the way to the Oligocene age. So they've been around for a long time, and they obviously have survived a lot of things in their existence. So looking at what I got out of my study and things that I saw in my research, the gopher tortoise is quite adaptable. The cognition to adapt to survive, but we need to get smart about our conservation efforts because they're facing challenges that they never did face before. Revised statement, again, my original hypothesis, the hypothesis that gopher tortoises will adapt, survive, and support their immediate ecosystems by adapting their food foraging routines, burrow behaviors, and reproduction rates. I focused on the first two, so probably should take that third one out, which of course those two have merit, but the current research that is out there is really lacking on the reproduction as well as the survival rates. To really look at these behaviors would really take a great deal of time and patience. Again, they spend a fair amount of time in their burrows, and to be able to study that would take a lot of time, a lot of camera time, and a lot of energy to be able to do that. Not that it's not important, and we really need to understand that a whole lot better. But I do stand by my statement that these behaviors and their adjustment to the changing world will determine their survival, and frankly ours. If you're interested in the gopher tortoise and some of the things that I presented and want to look a little bit further, here's some references that I have provided for you.